Right now your brain is generating a version of reality, and there's a very good chance that version is skewed toward danger, toward inadequacy, toward the past. And while you're living inside that skewed version, opportunities are passing, connections are being missed. The version of yourself that's based on accurate thinking, not filtered, not distorted, is waiting on the other side of this understanding. Every day spent inside the brain's lies is a day spent in a reality that doesn't fully exist. This audiobook helps you step outside it and into something more accurate, more generous, and more alive. Like this, subscribe and share it. Don't let anyone else spend another day inside their brain's distortions. Chapter 1: The voice in your head is not you. There is a voice in your head that sounds like you, thinks like you, and reacts faster than you can control. It comments on your decisions, predicts your failures, and quietly shapes the direction of your life. Most people trust that voice without question. That is the mistake. That voice is not you. It is a survival mechanism. It is a pattern recognition system built from past experiences, fears, and repeated thoughts. Its primary goal is not your happiness, not your success, not your growth. Its primary goal is to keep you safe. And in today's world, safe often means small. Think about the last time you hesitated to take a risk. Maybe it was applying for a job you felt unqualified for. Maybe it was starting a business, speaking up in a meeting, or even approaching someone you were interested in. That voice likely said something like, "You're not ready," or "You'll embarrass yourself," or "What if you fail?" It felt real. It felt logical. It felt like truth, but it wasn't truth. It was protection. Your brain is wired to avoid pain more than it is wired to seek growth. Thousands of years ago, that instinct kept humans alive. Today it keeps you stuck. The same mechanism that once helped your ancestors avoid predators now convinces you not to send an email, not to speak up, not to try. And here's the dangerous part. The brain doesn't distinguish between physical danger and emotional discomfort. To your brain, rejection feels like threat. Failure feels like threat. Uncertainty feels like threat. So it lies to you in ways that feel convincing enough to stop you. It says you're not good enough when in reality you're just inexperienced. It says you're too late when in reality you're just getting started. It says others are better when in reality you haven't given yourself a real chance. The voice is persuasive because it uses your past as evidence. It reminds you of every mistake, every awkward moment, every failure. It builds a case against you using selective memory. It ignores your wins. It minimizes your progress. It exaggerates your flaws. Imagine a lawyer who only presents evidence that proves you are incapable. That is what your brain does when it is operating from fear, but you are not that evidence. You are the one listening to it. There is a critical difference between having a thought and believing it. Most people collapse those two into one. A thought appears and they accept it as fact. But thoughts are not facts. Thoughts are suggestions, and many of those suggestions are wrong. Consider this. If someone else spoke to you the way your inner voice does, would you trust them? If someone followed you around all day saying you're going to mess this up, or you're not as good as them, or you should just play it safe, would you take their advice? Of course not. You would recognize it as negativity, as fear, as limitation. But when that same message comes from inside your own head, you accept it. That is where change begins. The moment you realize that the voice in your head is not your identity but a tool that sometimes malfunctions, you gain distance from it. And distance creates power. Think of your mind like a radio. Thoughts are signals that come and go. Some are useful, some are noise. You don't have to listen to every station that comes through. You can choose what to tune into, but choice requires awareness. Most people are running on autopilot. They don't notice their thoughts. They react to them. They obey them. They let those thoughts dictate their actions. And over time, those actions shape their entire life. If your thoughts are consistently negative, fearful, and limiting, your life will reflect that, not because it's destiny, but because it's repetition. Your brain learns from what you feed it. Every time you believe a limiting thought, you reinforce it. Every time you act on fear, you strengthen that pattern. And over time, it becomes your default. But the reverse is also true. Every time you question a limiting thought, you weaken it. Every time you act despite fear, you rewire your brain. Every time you choose growth over comfort, you expand what your brain believes is possible. If this audiobook is bringing you value so far, take a moment to like it. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Leave a comment with your biggest takeaway. And subscribe to Prime Audiobooks for more content like this. Now let's continue. The first step in stopping your brain from lying to you is recognizing the lies. And those lies often follow predictable patterns. One of the most common lies is overgeneralization. You fail once and your brain says you always fail. You get rejected once and it says no one will ever choose you. It takes a single moment and stretches it across your entire identity. Another lie is mind reading. Your brain assumes it knows what others are thinking. They think I'm stupid. They don't respect me. They're judging me. But the truth is you don't know what they're thinking. Your brain fills in the blanks with fear. Then there's catastrophizing. You imagine the worst possible outcome and treat it as inevitable. You turn small risks into massive threats. You avoid action because the imagined consequence feels too big. And finally, there's the lie of permanence. Your brain tells you that how things are now is how they will always be. If you're struggling, it says you'll always struggle. If you're behind, it says you'll always be behind. These patterns are not truth, they are habits of thinking, and habits can be changed, but change does not happen by accident. It happens through deliberate interruption. When a negative thought appears, don't immediately believe it. Pause, observe it, question it. Ask yourself, is this absolutely true? Most of the time it is. Ask, what evidence do I have that contradicts this? You'll find more than you expect. Ask, what would I say to a friend who had this thought? You'll notice that you are far more compassionate and rational with others than you are with yourself. This is how you begin to separate from the voice. You are not trying to eliminate thoughts. That's impossible. You are learning to stop obeying them blindly. There is a version of you that exists beyond fear, beyond doubt, beyond hesitation. But that version only emerges when you stop treating every thought as a command. The truth is your brain will continue to produce fear-based thoughts. That's its job, but it doesn't get to decide your actions. That's your job. And the more you practice this, the stronger that separation becomes. You begin to notice the voice without being controlled by it. You begin to act based on intention, not impulse. You begin to build a life that reflects your decisions, not your fears. So as you move forward, start paying attention. Notice the tone of your inner voice. Notice when it limits you. Notice when it tries to protect you by keeping you small, and when it does, don't fight it, don't suppress it, just recognize it for what it is, a voice, not the truth, not your identity, just a voice, and you are the one who decides whether to listen. As you reflect on this, consider how many of your recent decisions were driven by fear disguised as logic. Think about the opportunities you've avoided because your brain convinced you not to try. Ask yourself what might change if you stopped believing every thought that crossed your mind. And most importantly, who you could become if you finally took control of the voice that has been controlling you. Chapter 2. The brain is a prediction machine that confuses guessing with truth. In the last chapter, you started to see that the voice in your head is not an authority but a pattern built from fear, memory, and protection. You also saw how easily that voice disguises assumptions as facts and pushes you into decisions that keep you small. What matters now is understanding where that voice gets its confidence, because it is not guessing randomly, it is predicting. Your brain is not designed to tell you the truth. It is designed to predict what will happen next. Every second of your life, it is scanning patterns from your past, combining them with what is happening now and building a forecast of the future. It does this so fast that you experience those forecasts as reality. The problem is that prediction is not truth. It is probability based on limited data, yet your mind delivers it with certainty. When your brain says this will go badly, it is not reporting the future. It is replaying past discomfort and projecting it forward. When it says you are going to fail, it is not seeing your future. It is remembering similar moments where you struggled and assuming repetition. This is why your fears feel so real. They are built from experience, but experience is not a guarantee. It is only history. Think about how often you avoided something that never turned out as bad as you imagined. The conversation you rehearsed for hours that went fine. The presentation you dreaded that no one reacted to the way you feared. The opportunity you passed on that someone else took and grew from. Your brain doesn't update easily. It overweights old data and underweights new possibility. That is why you can succeed 5 times and still feel like a failure after one setback. The prediction system is biased toward threat, not accuracy. And it becomes even more convincing when emotion gets involved. The more emotionally charged a memory is, the more your brain treats it as important data. So embarrassment, rejection, and failure get amplified. Success often gets minimized or forgotten entirely. That means your internal forecast is often built on emotional highlights rather than balanced reality. This is where people start living inside a distorted future that never arrives. They prepare for worst-case scenarios as if they are guaranteed outcomes. They hesitate, they delay, they stay in situations that feel safe but limiting, not because reality demands it, but because prediction does. Imagine a weather system that always predicts storms because storms have happened before. Even on clear days, it warns you to stay inside. You would eventually stop trusting it. Yet most people never question the internal forecast in their own mind. Your brain is powerful, but it is not objective. It is biased towards survival, not expansion. It assumes uncertainty is danger. It assumes unfamiliarity is risk. It assumes discomfort is failure. But growth lives in all 3 of those spaces. Every time you step into something new, your brain labels it as unpredictable. And unpredictable to your brain equals unsafe. So it generates hesitation, doubt, and resistance. That resistance is not truth. It is prediction trying to protect you from discomfort it doesn't understand. The key shift is realizing that prediction is not instruction. Just because your brain predicts an outcome does not mean you must act as if it is guaranteed. A thought like "this will be awkward" is not a reason to stop. It is simply a forecast based on limited exposure. And forecasts can be wrong. The more you notice this, the more space you create between thought and action. And in that space your life begins to change, because action is where prediction gets corrected. If you never act, your brain never updates. It keeps using old data to simulate your future. But when you act despite uncertainty, you feed your brain new evidence, and slowly the system recalibrates. You begin to see that things you feared were survivable. You begin to realize that discomfort does not equal danger. You begin to understand that uncertainty is not a warning sign but a starting point. This is not about forcing positivity. It is about building accuracy. A more accurate brain is less fearful. A less fearful brain is more capable. A more capable brain creates more options in your life. But accuracy does not come from thinking harder, it comes from experiencing more. Every avoided action strengthens the prediction that avoidance was necessary. Every completed action weakens it. That is how your internal model of reality is built, not through belief but through repetition. And this is where discipline enters the picture, not discipline as punishment, but discipline as correction. The willingness to act even when your prediction system is loud, because the voice will always have a forecast. It will say this might fail. It will say this might hurt. It will say this might not be worth it. But it does not get the final vote. Your job is not to eliminate the prediction. Your job is to test it. And every time you test it, you either confirm it or weaken it. Either outcome is valuable because both led to clarity. What destroys progress is not being wrong. It is never checking. If this audiobook is bringing you value so far, take a moment to like it. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Leave a comment with your biggest takeaway. And subscribe to Prime Audiobooks for more content like this. Now let's continue. Most people don't realize how much their lives are shaped by untested predictions. They assume they already know how things will go, so they never challenge the assumption. They build entire identities around forecasts that were never proven. I'm not good at speaking. I'm not the type of person who succeeds in that field. I always mess things up when it matters. These are not facts, they are repeated predictions that were never questioned enough times to break. And the brain loves repetition. The more a prediction is repeated, the more real it feels. Even if it is wrong, that is why exposure matters, not just physical exposure, but mental exposure to contradiction. You need experiences that disprove your internal forecasts. Otherwise, your brain keeps recycling the same conclusions. This is how confidence is actually built, not by convincing yourself you can succeed, but by collecting enough evidence that your predictions of failure are unreliable. At some point, you stop trusting the fear because it has been wrong too many times. And when that happens, something shifts. You still feel hesitation, but it no longer controls you. You still hear doubt, but it no longer defines your direction. You begin to operate from evidence instead of assumption. You start choosing actions based on possibility instead of prediction. And that changes everything, because your future is not shaped by what your brain predicts, it is shaped by what you are willing to test. As you move forward, notice how often you stop yourself before anything even happens. Notice how many decisions are made in advance by a voice that has never actually lived the outcome. Notice how much of your life is built on imagined futures rather than real experiences. Then consider what would change if you treated every prediction as unverified. What if you stopped accepting forecasts as facts? What if you treated uncertainty not as a stop sign but as an open door? And as you reflect on that, think about how many parts of your life are waiting on evidence you have not yet collected, and what might become possible if you finally stepped into the unknown long enough to see what is actually there. Chapter 3: Feelings are not evidence. You have already seen how the mind creates a voice that feels like truth, and how that voice builds predictions that are often wrong but convincing. You also saw how those predictions shape hesitation and limit action before anything even happens. Now the focus shifts to something even more immediate, because your brain does not just predict your future, it also misinterprets your present through emotion. Most people assume that if something feels true, it must be true. That is one of the most expensive mistakes a mind can make. Feelings are real, they are powerful, but they are not reliable evidence. Your brain generates emotions as signals, not verdicts. They are meant to inform you about internal states, not define external reality. But in practice, most people reverse that. They treat emotion as proof. If you feel anxious, you assume something is wrong. If you feel unmotivated, you assume you cannot succeed. If you feel uncomfortable, you assume you should stop. The feeling becomes the decision maker. But feelings are not neutral observations. They are interpretations filtered through memory, prediction, and attention. Think about a moment when you walked into a room and immediately felt like people were judging you. Nothing had been said, no evidence had been presented, but your body reacted anyway. Your heart rate changed. Your posture shifted. Your mind began scanning for signs of rejection. That experience felt like truth, but it was not truth. It was your brain running a threat simulation based on social risk. In reality, most people were likely focused on themselves, not you. But your internal system does not wait for proof. It reacts to possibility. This is how emotional reasoning takes control. The brain produces a feeling, then uses that feeling as justification for belief. It becomes circular. I feel this way, therefore it must be true, and because it is true, I feel this way. There is no exit in that loop unless you interrupt it. One of the most common examples is the feeling of inadequacy. You wake up feeling behind in life, and your brain immediately constructs a narrative to match that feeling. You must be behind, you must be failing, you must be less capable than others. The feeling becomes evidence, but nothing external actually confirmed that. The feeling came first, the interpretation followed. Another example is motivation. People often believe they need to feel motivated before taking action. So they wait, they delay, they try to generate a feeling before doing the work. But motivation is not a starting point. It is often a result of action, not a requirement for it. The brain confuses emotional readiness with actual readiness. It tells you to wait until you feel confident before you start. It tells you to wait until you feel certain before you decide. It tells you to wait until discomfort disappears before you move forward. But if you only act when your emotions agree, your life becomes controlled by temporary states that were never designed to lead. Your emotional system is reactive, not strategic. It responds to immediate perception, not long-term goals. That is why it pushes you toward comfort in the short term, even when discomfort is required for growth. Consider physical training. The feeling during a difficult workout is not a reflection of your capability. It is a reflection of stress in the moment. If you believed that feeling fully you would stop every time it appeared, you would interpret effort as failure. But effort is not failure. It is the process of adaptation. The same applies to mental challenges. Confusion does not mean inability. Resistance does not mean wrong direction. Anxiety does not mean danger. These are signals, not stop signs. The danger comes when signals are treated as conclusions. Your brain is constantly trying to conserve energy. Emotional shortcuts help it do that. Instead of analyzing deeply, it gives you a feeling and encourages immediate action based on that feeling. It saves effort, but it reduces accuracy. And over time, that shortcut becomes a habit of interpretation. You stop questioning your emotional states, you start obeying them. But emotional states are constantly changing. They are influenced by sleep, environment, stress, memory, and even subtle biological fluctuations. If you base your decisions on them, your direction in life will constantly shift with internal weather patterns. That is not stability, that is reaction. Real control begins when you stop treating feelings as instructions. You can feel fear and still move forward. You can feel doubt and still act. You can feel discomfort and still continue. None of these feelings are indicators that something is wrong. They are indicators that something is unfamiliar. And unfamiliar is exactly where growth lives. The brain does not distinguish between emotional discomfort caused by danger and emotional discomfort caused by progress. It reacts the same way to both. That is why discipline is not about eliminating feelings. It is about acting independently of them. If this audiobook is bringing you value so far, take a moment to like it. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Leave a comment with your biggest takeaway. And subscribe to Prime Audiobooks for more content like this. Now let's continue. Most emotional reactions are based on incomplete information. The brain makes a rapid assessment, generates a feeling, and then fills in the story afterward. You feel left out, so your brain assumes rejection. You feel pressure, so your brain assumes failure. You feel uncertainty, so your brain assumes danger. But none of those assumptions are verified in real time. This is why emotional distance is powerful. It allows you to observe the feeling without immediately obeying it. Instead of "I feel this, so it must be true," you begin to operate from "I feel this, but I need more information." That shift creates space. And in that space, better decisions become possible. You are not trying to suppress emotion. Suppression creates tension. You are learning to stop interpreting emotion as fact. There is a difference between feeling something and concluding something. Most people collapse that difference without noticing. A feeling is an internal signal. A conclusion is a decision about reality. When you confuse the two, you outsource your decision-making to temporary states that were never designed to lead your life. This is why emotional discipline is one of the most important skills you can develop. not because emotions are bad, but because they are incomplete. A strong mind is not one that does not feel. It is one that does not obey every feeling it experiences. As you begin to notice this, you will see how often your actions are shaped by emotional interpretation rather than objective reality. You will notice how quickly discomfort becomes justification for stopping. You will notice how easily fear becomes a reason to avoid. And once you see it clearly, it becomes harder to unsee. Because now you understand that your feelings are not commands. They are signals that require interpretation, not obedience. And interpretation requires pause, awareness, and willingness to question what seems obvious. As you reflect on this, consider how many decisions in your life were made not from clarity, but from emotion in the moment. Consider how often a temporary feeling shaped a permanent direction. And consider what might change if you stopped treating internal states as external truths. Notice what becomes possible when you no longer require emotional permission to act. Notice what opens up when discomfort is no longer a stopping point but simply a condition of movement. And as you hold that awareness, you begin to see that your life is not shaped by what you feel, but by what you choose to do while feeling it. Chapter 4: Your mind confuses familiarity with safety. You have already seen how the inner voice shapes predictions that feel certain, but are often just recycled fear, and how emotions can be powerful signals that are mistaken for truth. You've also seen how quickly the brain builds stories from incomplete information, and how those stories can quietly control behavior. Now the focus shifts to something even more subtle, because much of what holds people back is not fear of the unknown but addiction to what feels familiar. Your brain does not prioritize what is best for you. It prioritizes what it recognizes. Familiarity feels like safety even when it is not. And unfamiliarity feels like danger even when it is exactly what you need. This is one of the most important misalignments in human psychology. It explains why people stay in the same patterns, repeat the same mistakes, and return to situations that limit them, not because those situations are good, but because they are known. Your brain is constantly scanning your environment for patterns it has seen before. When something matches a previous experience, it relaxes. When something does not match, it increases alertness. That alertness is not logic, it is automatic protection. The problem is that your past is not a reliable guide for your future. It only reflects what has already happened, not what is possible. But your brain treats it as if it does. Think about a job you stayed in longer than you should have. Not because it was fulfilling, but because it was predictable. You knew the routine, you knew the expectations. Even if it drained you, it was familiar. Leaving meant stepping into uncertainty, and uncertainty triggers resistance. Or think about relationships where the dynamic was unhealthy but still stayed because the emotional patterns were recognizable. The arguments, the cycles, the highs and lows. Even pain becomes comfortable when it is familiar enough. This is not a conscious decision. It is a conditioning loop. Your brain associates repetition with stability, and stability in evolutionary terms meant survival. But in modern life, stability can also mean stagnation. The mind prefers a predictable struggle over an unpredictable opportunity, because struggle is known, opportunity is not. This is why growth feels uncomfortable even when it is positive. Not because growth is bad, but because it is unfamiliar. Every time you attempt something new, your brain runs a compatibility check against your past. If it finds no match, it labels the experience as risky, not because it is dangerous, but because it is unknown. That label creates hesitation, and hesitation often turns into avoidance. Over time, avoidance reinforces the belief that unfamiliar situations are not for you. You start to identify as someone who doesn't do that kind of thing, not because of evidence, but because of repetition. But repetition does not equal truth, it only equals exposure. The more you stay within familiar boundaries, the smaller those boundaries become, not physically, but mentally. Your sense of what is possible begins to shrink to match what you have already experienced. And this is how potential gets quietly reduced without any dramatic failure. There is no single moment where everything breaks, just a series of small decisions to stay where it feels known. The brain does not resist change because it is malicious. It resists change because it is efficient. Familiar patterns require less energy. They demand less attention. They feel easier, but easier is not always better. Think of someone who wants to improve their health but keeps returning to the same habits, not because they don't understand what to do, but because the current pattern is automatic. It requires no thought. The new pattern requires effort, awareness, and disruption of routine. The brain always prefers the path of least resistance, even if that path leads nowhere meaningful. This is why discipline feels so difficult at first. You are not just changing behavior, you are overriding familiarity. You are telling your brain that what it has known is no longer the standard. That creates internal friction, and that friction is what most people interpret as a sign to stop. But friction is not a warning, it is transition. You are moving from an old pattern into a new one, and the in-between space feels unstable because it is unfamiliar to your nervous system. But nothing is actually wrong. You are just outside of your conditioning. If this audiobook is bringing you value so far, take a moment to like it. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Leave a comment with your biggest takeaway. And subscribe to Prime Audiobooks for more content like this. Now let's continue. One of the most powerful illusions your brain creates is the idea that familiarity equals identity. Because you have done something repeatedly, you start to believe that it defines you. I'm not a risk taker. I'm not disciplined. I'm not the kind of person who does that. But those are not identities. They are histories. Your brain confuses repetition with definition. It assumes that because something has been true, it must continue to be true. But that assumption ignores your ability to interrupt patterns. The moment you do something unfamiliar and survive it, your brain has to update. The prediction system adjusts, the label weakens, the boundary expands. This is how identity actually changes, not through belief alone, but through contradiction of familiarity. Each time you act outside of your known patterns, you expand what your brain considers normal. And over time, what once felt impossible becomes routine. But the first step always feels unnatural, because your brain is measuring it against the past instead of the future. This is where most people misinterpret discomfort as failure. They assume that because something feels unfamiliar, it must not be right for them. But in reality, unfamiliarity is often a sign that you are stepping outside the limits your brain has been operating within. And those limits are not fixed, they are learned. Your current comfort zone is not a reflection of your potential. It is a reflection of your exposure. If you only expose yourself to certain experiences, your brain will conclude that those experiences define your range. But that range is not fixed. It expands with action. The challenge is that expansion always feels like loss at first. You lose predictability. You lose control of certainty. You lose the illusion of safety that comes from knowing exactly what will happen. But what you gain is capacity, and capacity is what determines the size of your life. As you move forward, start noticing how often your decisions are influenced by familiarity rather than intention. Notice how often you choose what feels known instead of what feels meaningful. Notice how often comfort is prioritized over growth without conscious awareness. Then begin to question that pattern, not with force, but with observation. What would happen if unfamiliarity stopped being a warning and started being a signal of expansion instead? What if discomfort was not a stop sign, but a sign that your current identity is being challenged? And as you hold that thought, you begin to see that your life is not limited by what you want, but by what your brain is familiar with. Chapter 5: Your attention is being hijacked by default settings you never chose. You've already seen how your inner voice builds false certainty, how emotions get mistaken for evidence, and how familiarity quietly shapes the boundaries of your life. All of that points to something deeper running underneath everything you think and feel, because your brain is not just lying to you through thoughts and feelings. It is also deciding what you notice in the first place. Most people assume they are seeing reality clearly. In truth, they are only seeing what their attention has been trained to prioritize. Your attention is not neutral, it is selective. And that selectivity is one of the main ways your brain controls your perception without you realizing it. Every second, your environment contains far more information than you can consciously process. Sounds, movement, memories, internal sensations, external cues, future concerns, past reflections. If your brain tried to process all of it equally, you would be overwhelmed immediately. So it filters, it chooses, it highlights certain inputs and ignores others. The problem is that those filters are not always updated. They are often based on old survival priorities, past experiences, and emotional conditioning. That means you are not seeing the world as it is. You are seeing the world as your attention system has been trained to interpret it. This is why two people can live in the same situation and experience completely different realities. One person notices opportunity, the other notices threat. One sees possibility, the other sees limitation. The external environment is the same, but the internal filter is different. Your brain is constantly asking one question without you consciously realizing it. What is important right now? And whatever it labels as important becomes your reality. If your attention is trained on problems, you will find problems everywhere. If your attention is trained on failure, you will collect evidence of failure. If your attention is trained on judgment, you will feel judged even in neutral environments. Not because those things are objectively dominating your world, but because your filter is amplifying them. This is why anxiety feels so consuming. It is not that danger is everywhere. It is that attention is locked onto potential danger signals and ignoring everything else. Your brain begins to scan for threats with high sensitivity, and once it finds one possibility, it expands it into a pattern. That pattern then becomes your perceived reality. The same mechanism applies to self-doubt. If your attention is directed toward flaws, mistakes, or comparisons, your brain will continuously find evidence to reinforce that focus. It will ignore neutral or positive data because it is not aligned with the current filter. This creates a distorted feedback loop. What you focus on becomes what you notice. What you notice becomes what you believe shapes what you expect, and what you expect shapes what you continue to focus on. And so your perception becomes self-reinforcing without ever being questioned. Most people think change starts with action, but action is often downstream of attention. If your attention is not controlled, your actions will keep orbiting the same limited set of inputs. This is why breaking patterns requires more than motivation. It requires interrupting where attention goes automatically. Your brain defaults to efficiency. It prioritizes familiar stimuli, emotionally charged signals, and repetitive patterns. That means whatever has grabbed your attention in the past is more likely to grab it again in the future. This is how habits of perception form. Not just habits of behavior, but habits of noticing. You begin to unconsciously scan for certain types of information and ignore others. And over time, that becomes your version of reality. Think about how often you notice things only after they have been labeled as important. A new car model you suddenly see everywhere after you become aware of it. A word you never noticed before that now appears constantly. A problem you were not focused on that suddenly seems to exist in multiple places. The external world did not change. Your attention did. That is the illusion. And if attention can be redirected, perception can be reshaped. This is where most people underestimate their own mind. They believe they are reacting to reality when in fact they are reacting to filtered versions of reality shaped by internal settings they never consciously chose. Your brain is not lying through false information alone. It is lying through selective visibility. It hides context, it highlights threats, it amplifies emotional relevance, and it reduces complexity into simplified interpretations that feel manageable. But manageable is not the same as accurate. The challenge is that attention feels automatic. It feels like something that just happens, but it is not fully automatic. It is trainable. Where you repeatedly place attention becomes your default focus over time. And that default focus becomes your mental environment. If your attention is constantly pulled toward comparison, your life will feel like competition. If it is pulled toward scarcity, your life will feel limited. If it is pulled toward uncertainty, your life will feel unstable. Not because those conditions dominate your reality, but because they dominate your focus. If this audiobook is bringing you value so far, take a moment to like it. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Leave a comment with your biggest takeaway, and subscribe to Prime Audiobooks for more content like this. Now let's continue. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is learning to notice where your attention goes without permission, not to control it immediately, but to observe it, because once you observe it, you begin to see patterns. And once you see patterns, you can interrupt them. Most people never reach this stage because they assume their attention is already under control. They believe they are choosing what matters. But in reality, much of attention is reactive. It responds to emotional triggers, environmental cues, and internal habits. This is why focus feels difficult. It is not just about discipline. It is about competing against a system that is designed to prioritize distraction that feels relevant in the moment. And relevance is often defined by emotion, not logic. That is why social media notifications and even internal worries are so effective at pulling attention. They trigger emotional relevance faster than long-term goals ever can. Your brain will always prioritize what feels urgent over what is important unless you train it otherwise. And training it requires interruption, not forceful control, but repeated redirection. Each time you notice your attention drifting and bring it back intentionally, you are rewriting default settings. You are teaching your brain what matters through repetition, not instruction. Over time, attention becomes less reactive and more deliberate. And when attention becomes deliberate, perception becomes clearer. You start seeing what is actually present, not just what your brain has been trained to highlight. This is where clarity begins to emerge, not because reality changes, but because filters become less distorted. You begin to notice neutral space that was previously ignored. You begin to see possibilities that were previously filtered out. You begin to experience situations without immediate interpretation. And in that space, your mind becomes less reactive and more grounded. As you reflect on this, consider how much of your current experience is shaped not by what is happening, but by what your attention is repeatedly drawn toward. Consider how many assumptions are formed simply because certain details are emphasized while others are ignored. And then consider what might change if you began to treat attention as something you guide rather than something you follow. Notice what becomes available when you are no longer fully controlled by what grabs your focus. Chapter 6: You are not your mind, you are the one who can change it. You've already seen how the inner voice can distort truth, how emotions can feel like evidence, how familiarity can quietly shrink your choices, and how attention can be hijacked by patterns you never consciously selected. Put together, all of that reveals something important. Your brain is not built to lead your life with perfect accuracy. It is built to keep you operating within familiar, efficient patterns. And those patterns are not always aligned with who you want to become. Now everything comes down to this final shift: not controlling your mind perfectly, not eliminating thoughts or feelings, but realizing you are not trapped inside them. Most people live as if their thoughts are instructions, their emotions are truths, and their attention is reality. But none of those things are final. They are processes happening inside you, not definitions of you. The moment you stop identifying with every thought, everything changes. Your mind produces content constantly. It generates predictions, memories, interpretations, comparisons, and fears without pause. Most of it is automatic. It appears before you choose anything. That is why it feels like you, because it is close, continuous, and familiar. But closeness is not identity. A radio plays music in your room, but the music is not the room. It is just something passing through it. Your mind works the same way. Thoughts pass through awareness, but they are not awareness itself. The problem is that most people merge with every thought that appears. If a thought says "I'm behind," they become behind. If a thought says "I'm not capable," they become incapable. If a thought says I'll fail, they behave as if failure is guaranteed. This merging is what creates psychological limitation, not the presence of thoughts, but the belief that they define reality. Once you separate from that assumption, space appears, and in that space choice becomes possible. Choice is the foundation of change. Not perfect thinking, not perfect feeling. Choice. There will always be internal noise, always prediction, always emotion, always attention pulling in different directions. That does not stop. What changes is whether you treat that noise as authority or as information. You can feel doubt and still move forward. You can think uncertainty and still act. You can experience fear and still continue. Nothing about those internal states has the power to stop you unless you assign it that power. This is where personal transformation actually begins, not in changing the mind, but in changing your relationship to it. Most people try to win arguments with their thoughts. They try to outthink fear. They try to replace negative thoughts with positive ones. But that is still inside the same system. It is still treating thoughts as something that must be obeyed or defeated. The real shift is simpler and more powerful. You stop negotiating with every thought. You start observing it instead. A thought appears, you notice it. You do not immediately obey it. You do not immediately reject it. You simply recognize it as mental activity, not instruction. That recognition creates distance, and distance creates freedom. Freedom is not the absence of internal noise. It is the ability to act independently of it. And that is what most people never learn. They wait for clarity that never fully arrives. They wait for confidence before acting. They wait for motivation before starting. They wait for emotional permission before moving forward. But clarity, confidence, and motivation are often results of action, not prerequisites for it. Your brain learns through experience. It updates through exposure. It recalibrates through repetition of new behavior. If you wait for internal conditions to be perfect, you will stay exactly where you are, because the system you are trying to improve is the same system generating the hesitation. That is why action is not just behavior, it is feedback to your brain. Every action tells your mind what is possible. Every avoided action tells it what is dangerous. Over time, this shapes the boundaries of your perceived reality. And those boundaries are not fixed, they are trained. You are not stuck with your current mental limits. You are conditioned into them through repetition. And anything learned can be unlearned or rewritten through new repetition. This is where responsibility becomes powerful, not responsibility as pressure, but responsibility as control. The recognition that your mind is not an authority you must obey, but a system you can influence through what you repeatedly do. That means your future is not decided by your current thoughts. It is shaped by what you do while those thoughts are present. You do not need to wait for your brain to stop lying. You just need to stop treating its output as final truth. If this audiobook is bringing you value so far, take a moment to like it. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Leave a comment with your biggest takeaway. And subscribe to Prime Audiobooks for more content like this. Now let's continue. There is a version of you that exists beyond hesitation, beyond overthinking, beyond internal negotiation. Not because that version has no thoughts, but because that version is no longer controlled by them. That version acts first and evaluates later. That version learns through doing instead of waiting. That version understands that discomfort is not a signal to stop, but a signal that something unfamiliar is being built. You do not need to become someone else to reach that state. You need to stop mistaking your current mental noise for identity. Your thoughts are not commands. Your emotions are not conclusions. Your attention is not fixed. Your familiarity is not destiny. Every system your brain uses to guide you can be updated through experience, but only if you stop pausing every time the mind speaks. There will always be hesitation before growth. Always uncertainty before progress, always internal resistance before change. That pattern does not disappear, it becomes irrelevant when action continues anyway. That is what rewires everything, not understanding, not analysis, not insight alone, movement through resistance, and over time something shifts. The voice is still there but it loses authority. The emotions are still present but they lose control. The attention still drifts but you bring it back faster. The familiarity still pulls but it no longer decides. You begin to experience life directly, not through interpretation alone. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of comply. You act instead of wait. And in that shift you realize something that was true the entire time. You were never your thoughts. You were the one aware of them. You were never your emotions. You were the one experiencing them. You were never your attention patterns. You were the one able to redirect them, and you were never your limitations. You were the one capable of moving beyond them. This is not about becoming fearless. It is about becoming ungoverned by fear, not about eliminating doubt, but about refusing to let doubt decide direction, not about perfect control, but about consistent return to choice. And choice repeated enough times becomes identity. As you leave this behind, there is nothing you need to chase and nothing you need to fix in this moment. Only awareness of what has been running automatically. And the quiet realization that it does not have to continue running unchecked. So you move forward with a different relationship to your mind, not as a prisoner of it, not as an enemy of it, but as the one who notices it, questions it, and decides what happens next. And in that decision everything changes, because the moment you stop believing every thought, every feeling, every prediction, and every familiar pattern as final truth, you finally begin to live from something deeper than reaction. You begin to live from choice. And that is where real change begins.